All right, you're on the air.
Hi, this is Mary Ann Franzese, and welcome to Radical Democracy. Today we're going to be talking about heroic conversations with the host of this show, Maddi Cheers. But as you can see, Maddie's not starting it, or as you can hear, Maddie isn't here to start it. She got caught up in a little bit of traffic. So here I am by myself. And the question I have is, can I have a conversation, a heroic conversation on air by myself? Well, I have plenty of conversations with myself in a day. So I think the answer is yes, because how many of us have those conversations going on in our head? And what makes it a heroic conversation versus a torture conversation where we are going over worries or details or stresses and having that kind of conversation that does not really move us towards peace or resolution or change. And I think maybe the conversation starts with ourselves. Then maybe there's also the kind of conversation that's between us and our higher power, God, creator, whatever we want to call that force, that divine force in the universe, where we turn to and have the heroic conversations. And actually, as I'm just talking and letting this kind of come to me as we're going along, my thought is that's probably the original heroic conversation. Because when we go before God or our higher power, we are in a state of vulnerability. We usually arrive at that conversation scared, unsure, questioning, looking for something that we don't know how to find the answer to. And in fact, that is the true nature of the heroic conversation. It's a conversation into the unknown. It's a conversation where the answer is not before us, where the argument is not planned out, where the research and the facts are not there to back us up. It is where we do not know the answer. And it takes courage to engage it. And so when we have that kind of conversation alone, when we're asking for help, I need help, or please show me the way, or send me a sign, that conversation where the answer does not come back in an immediate response. That's heroic conversation, where you put out the question and then you begin to walk. You walk and you look for clues and you stay with it and you search and you suffer and you have joy and you discover the answer, pieces of the answer along the way. And sometimes the answer comes from nature. Sometimes the answer comes from somebody we meet on our path. Sometimes the answer is in the mundane, and sometimes it is in the research laboratory where there is the aha. So heroic conversation, first part being, oh no, I don't want to have this conversation, to the surrender of, okay, I've got to have this conversation, and I need to muster the courage to find the words, to, oh, okay. And eventually, if we're really blessed, we hit the moment of, aha, oh. And once we get that, something changes in us, something profound, something that we didn't know we knew. something that is new and worthy and good and will connect us more deeply to another human being, to a community of human beings. And then we return with that wisdom and share it. And it allows us to understand just the universal principles of what it in fact means to be a human being. So that was my stream of consciousness on the heroic journey and the heroic conversation that we're talking about today, and me kind of being on the air by myself. So I'm actually calling in. So I don't know if Maddi's entered the airspace. Has she entered yet, Bobby? You'll let me know when she gets here? I guess not.
Yep.
So I will not here yet?
Yeah, I'm going to let you know. She's still not here yet.
Okay, so then I'm going to keep talking, and I guess I'll talk a little bit more now that I just kind of spewed all of that. Thank you, wherever that came from in me. But what makes something a heroic conversation? And I think the very first criteria is it is not comfortable. Right now, audience, I am having a heroic conversation with you because it is uncomfortable to kind of be here on the air by myself and blind to whether Maddi enters the space or not. So there is
I'm
a discomfort. Here. And there she is. The voice arrived. Welcome, Maddi. Getting that mic on.
Thank you for welcoming me, and thank you everyone for listening.
So, Maddi, I was just saying that, in my opinion, what makes something a heroic conversation, and in a sense, we're actually having one, given the way this unfolded, is a criteria of discomfort.
Yes.
It is a conversation that we don't necessarily want to have.
Exactly.
But no, we need to have it.
Yes.
Or we're called to have it. And it takes courage. And we usually don't want to have those kinds of conversation because they bring us to our vulnerability.
That's exactly
the places that we're like embarrassed about or ashamed of or afraid we might hurt somebody else or don't want exposed. And when we take that risk and enter into the uncomfortable conversation is where we begin this journey that can be heroic.
Yes.
So that was what I was saying. Go ahead, get yourself here.
Well, I can't.
What were you thinking?
I think it was kind of a cool lead in right there. So, and I say that because I had come across this article on this Black musician, David, hold a second, I don't want to get his name wrong because that would really be bad. Daryl Davis. There we go. Daryl Davis. So in this conversation, he is NPR did a report on him a few years ago, and he is, I think it was 2017, he is a man who started having conversations with people in the KKK. He's a black blues musician. And it all started for him. He was playing in a blues club, and there was a white gentleman there who said, I didn't know black people played this music. And he was like, we invented this music. And they got into this conversation, and it turned out by the end that he finds out that the gentleman is a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And they continue to have this conversation. It was extremely uncomfortable, but I found in his conversation, in his write-up, what he has to say about it is perfect for what we're talking about today, is about having the heroic conversation, truth-telling in the age of groupthink. And you know, we saw violence this weekend with the Antifa movement again. You know, we don't like this march that's going on. We think we should be violently overthrowing the government, you know, and throwing, you know, cement coffee cups, men filled coffee cups at people, injuring people
Ugh.
in the middle of what was a peaceful protest. So you're calling yourself an anti-fascist, and yet you're acting like a fascist, because
Right.
basically you want people to do what you want, right? Whereas we
Mm-hmm.
have this
Yep.
gentleman who really, really, this talk about being uncomfortable, but this is what he came away with. He said that just like any good salesman, you want a return visit. And they recognized that I'd done my homework. He talks about how he looked up the whole history of the Klan. He found out how it
Mm.
started, what it was all about, what their organization stood for. And he said that that allowed me to come back again. So now, can you imagine this gentleman who is an African American descent, but he refers to himself as black, so I will. So he can you that level of discomfort. You're sitting there doing research on the Ku Klux Klan, so you can get a return visit because you have decided that changing these people's minds is your mission in life. I don't know if it gets any more uncomfortable than that in reality.
Right.
You know,
No, it's completely uncomfortable, but it is interesting his process
right?
because part of what he had to do and part of the reason I think that the conversations even happened was because he entered with a an alignment with curiosity. Let me find out more
Yeah,
about the roots of this movement, about where it originated, about who these people are and believe they are, and what they in fact grew out of. Because that level of interest and really digging down beneath the surface of no, you're no good,
right.
to like, where did you come from? That then, in fact, shows a respect for the other that you're engaged in conversation with. And actually, what it does, if I'm kind of thinking about this, there are certain parameters, framework, building blocks to what will make a heroic conversation successful. And I think we go back to actually the three original instructions that if one, you can align in gratitude that you're actually having the opportunity to have the conversation.
Right.
Two, that you can respect who you are having the conversation with as another human being who came to this place where they're at based on some history. And I think three, a love for humanity that says we can do better if we can get through this.
Exactly.
So maybe that's the groundwork. Maybe that's the foundation. We go back to that.
Yes. And that's what he comes to. That is really his next statement is that began to chip away at their ideology, because when two enemies are talking, they're not fighting. It's when the talking ceases and the ground becomes fertile for violence. If you spend five
Mm,
minutes with your worst enemy, you will find that you both have something in common. I didn't convert anybody. They saw the light and converted themselves. That
mm-hmm.
that statement, that and this the you have to get the article. I'll send it to you if I
Mm-hmm.
haven't. I think I've posted it several times on Facebook. But that
Yes.
statement alone, I didn't convert anybody. They saw the light and converted themselves. And that is the power of conversation. And what I realized over the course of this week, I was talking about what happened to a person that's very close to me, about how he had laid the groundwork for this course. He had done all this volunteer work. He had really brought the idea of this course to the attention of this particular nonprofit. They had promised him and I'm repeating this word promise. They promised him that he would be the one to teach this program. And then they rescinded their promise because he was white. Now,
Oh. Mm.
Because they decided they wanted to go in a more diverse direction. Now,
Oh.
if here is the issue. I, if you're going, racism is defined as discriminating against someone based on their skin color. There is, to me, no such thing as reverse racism, as like, you know, what reverse racism is. It's like
Yes,
people
I
being
do. I know.
it's
I
just
never liked that.
racism. No. That if you're going to judge somebody by the outside, if you're going to stop them from getting a job, if you're going to stop them from working because of the color of their skin, you are behaving in a racist manner. And don't tell me just because the color of their skin is white that that is not racist. It is the definition of being racist, and it is the
Hmm.
definition of discrimination, because this person so highly qualified. And if you want to look at, is there somebody as meritorious the next time you offer the course, that's fine. But you made a promise, and this is the thing that I find very distressing in America today, is the lack of integrity. That group made a promise to somebody. Follow through. You may not want to do it next year. You may change your mind for next year. It was a one-shot course for a day. You may decide that, okay, well, but we made that promise. And it brings me back to the cornhusk doll story. It really
Mm.
brought me back to this when I heard about this happening, because for those of you that don't know the story of the cornhusk doll, and I think we've referred to it many times on this show, but in this story from the Haudenosaunee, the creator sends this doll that creator makes out of leftover corn husk to go down and teach the children games and stories and do all kinds of fun things with them, songs, because the parents are working very hard to prepare for this extraordinarily long winter. And the creator's idea is that if the parents can hear, they're feeling so sad, they're missing their children, they're getting up so early, they're coming back late at night, but if the parents can at least hear the children, they'll remember why they're working so hard, because it's for their children. And eventually, people keep telling her as she comes in how beautiful she is. So she's supposed to visit 3 villages. She only visits 2. She looks in the water. She doesn't go. The creator calls her back to Sky World and tells her again that she must go and do her job. And he asks for a promise, or it asks for a promise, however you would like to interpret the creator. And the cornhusk doll promises that she will get to 3 villages the next day. And then, of course, she gets down and she gets enamored of herself. And when she looks to see her reflection, her face is gone. The creator has taken away her face because she thought much too much about herself and not enough about the people, about the children. And that is how I see what happened in this situation, is that we look at something and we're saying to ourselves, oh, well, I don't want to look bad. I want to look
Mhm.
good. And in order to look good, I have to have this, and this in place. I have to have this many teachers. I have too many, however that decision was arrived at, right? But it's all
Mhm.
about them looking good in the eyes of others. It's not about having the courage to defend the fact that you made a promise. And you have to stick through that promise at least for this year. And then if you want to change it next year, that is entirely up to you. And you can question your own integrity on that. But I see that there is a lot of this when I think about the cornhusk doll losing her face. Part of that, as you've pointed out before, is to say, look, the creator sees who you really are inside. The other part of
Mhm.
it is to show people from the time they are young that what you look like on the outside makes no difference at all to who you are on the inside. And that is what is important, who you are on the inside. And beyond that, without a face, without a mouth, it is not the words that matter. It is the actions behind the words. So when I brought up the situation I just described on Facebook, which again, let me just attempt to follow through on this promise and not do anything controversial in writing because it's always
Mm.
misunderstood, and only
Yes.
stick to having these heroic conversations person to person, is I somebody wrote back about how this was all nonsense. This idea that that judging somebody by their skin color is racism. That only applies to people of color. And eventually, at the end, accused me of being like the president. That the president would side with
Oh
this.
boy.
Yeah. That this is the way the president feels. And this is somebody I know. So so and even that
So,
accusation
okay.
is not brought. There are people who actually agree with the president, who are not deplorables, who are very intelligent people. Weirdly enough, not weird for me, but weird would be for other people. I open up Facebook and I have last night, and I don't know if somebody sent this to me. I have never signed up for this page. I have a video of a black conservative woman who is a talk show host talking about how she is tired of people thinking of her as less than. That somehow because
Mm.
she's black, she has to be held to a lower standard. She's not in favor of reparations. She dragged herself up from the gutter, owing $150,000 in debt, and now has this talk show and is now a conservative black person. And she thinks that the Democratic Party is at fault for where she is. It was just the weirdest, you know,
Mm.
synchronicity that happened. And I thought, man, well, there's another woman who is having she was talking to a man who obviously wasn't of her belief, who happened to be white, who she and he talking, they weren't on the same side of this issue, but they were having the heroic conversation. And it was just so interesting going into this show to have had the experience in writing, to have
Yes.
seen the Oprah video that you send me where she's pleading with people to have face to face conversations with people you
Mm.
disagree with, to read this
Mhm.
article again, and to then just have that video appear. It was so, I'm
Yes.
guessing somebody sent it to me because actually most of the feedback was extremely positive, even from my Native American friends, who, as we all know, are the most depressed and
Mm.
suppressed communities
Mhm.
in the country. But it's it's these kinds of conversations that we are talking about
Yeah.
here.
Okay. So that is a lot to get off your chest
Yes, it is.
because if I'm here like sitting with you as a friend and a listener in the conversation we're having in the moment, I hear that and I'm like, wow, that's a lot to process. And as I, you know, approach responding, the very first place, if I'm going to respond from the heart, is wow, that's hard to receive that kind of feedback that you got from Facebook and how that it just creates the greater divide,
Right.
which is exactly what you're working against. And I know that many times you have like brought to my awareness this movement away from for or against, right?
Right.
That's
Right.
not heroic conversation. A
No.
heroic conversation is not debate of an
Right.
issue. That's different. That's I stand here on this issue and you stand here and we'll fight to the bloody end.
Right.
So to move away from that model in all of this is really to understand, I think, how the for and against starts in the first place. And your example is beautiful because your friend was promised something. The promise was broken. There wasn't obviously a heroic conversation around that broken promise
Right.
because if there was, this would be null and void because if the heroic conversation in that example would have been for the organizers to say, this is really uncomfortable. We're feeling a lot of pressure to be more diverse. We know we made you a promise. We can't keep it. Help. What can we do about this? And then you begin to create solutions that you didn't know were there before.
Yes.
There's a groundwork of understanding in it. But instead, the verdict comes down, sorry, we can't use you.
Yep.
It incites anger, betrayal,
Yes.
fury. Automatically now, the brain is wired for survival. Our brains go to, uh-oh, you're my enemy. You made me a promise. You betrayed it. You are going to enter the brain world of for and against. We have to. It's survival. So now, on the side of fury, we start building the argument. This is
Yes.
racism. This is what happens. What's going on? We take our stand. And then it allows more disagreement. What side are you on? The lines have been drawn.
Right.
That is exactly what you are looking to understand more deeply. And I think that, honestly, Maddi, was your lesson in all of this.
Yes.
Wow. I was just pulled into for and against. I can see how in this, and that's where it goes back to gratitude, the allowance, the creating the space for the conversation that is uncomfortable, diverts the path of division.
Right.
Let's imagine that beautiful, heroic, difficult, uncomfortable conversation between your friend and the organizer who went another way.
Right.
If that person could have said, I am embarrassed, I feel uncomfortable, I know I made you promises, and I also am being pressured to go a certain way, to look a certain way.
Exactly.
And maybe it could then work together.
Yes.
Create the workshop together. Are you willing to take a bit of a pay cut to do it with a partner?
Yeah.
Come on. There's 1,000 solutions in the universe.
If we just talk.
If we talk about the vulnerability.
That's it.
If we talk about what's under it, that place of, the brokenhearted, your friend who was made the promise and it was broken, what does he do with that if he can't have a conversation with the person who broke his heart?
Right.
Like, what do? You get mad and the other one becomes the enemy.
Right. Exactly.
So that's just my take on it. That's a little bit, going down the other side, but
no.
This is
go ahead.
Right?
Yeah, but
That's it.
That's it. That's the process, and that's where having somebody outside too helps. The more people we bring into the conversation, the better it is. Your perspective, your if we weren't having this conversation, I wouldn't be able to say to myself, "Whoa, I really did get into the divide here. I really was sitting there writing things where I felt like I had to prove my point." I
have to prove it. I have something to defend here.
Right. And then I'm looking there and I've got, this is the only person that disagrees with me. Yay, me. All these other 15 people think I'm brilliant, and that's, you get locked. That's the problem, is you've got to get the ego aside, which maybe is part of the grieving process. And I think especially when a friend hurts you, I think it's difficult to and the person that broke the promise that I was talking about in losing the job for my friend, they were close, so
even worse not to have a conversation, but even more courage it would have taken to have the conversation.
Right.
So because there were ties there that were too shameful for that person to be able to face. And, the thing about Facebook, it's like really, or any of our social media platforms now, it has allowed for the critic to rise up very strongly.
Yeah.
And that critic does fuel the shame factor.
Oh.
So it makes us then alter being vulnerable and truthful because we don't want to be slammed with that level of critique.
Right.
And it makes, it's like Brene Brown says, it makes daring greatly very difficult because it is about rising out of what is the critic going to say, which is exactly probably what that person who promised the job and took it back was afraid of some criticism for hiring a white guy. So that is where the daring to step into the truth in a way that expresses the vulnerability. It goes back to that.
It does.
Like, wow.
It does.
But the other thing that I'm also thinking is it is a process, and the first process of outrage, of unfair, right, that will stay in just righteousness unless we can slow down, go a little bit deeper, feel validated, and then feel a sense of like, wow, it is so hard to actually have the heroic conversations, and that's why they're heroic.
Yes.
It is not easy.
It is. It isn't easy. And, and I think that this is that part of the heroic conversation. It's this part that we talk about on a spiritual level often of the light in the darkness. When you step back, like I took down the entire post, regardless of how I felt about the situation, and decided you and I would talk about this today. We would talk about that because we are talking humans actually talking to each other.
Well, and also, look, we trust each other.
Yes.
We're very good friends. We have a long history. There is nothing I actually feel the obligation to be as truthful with you as I am with myself. Like, if I feel something, I feel like I could do it, you'll receive it. We may disagree, but there's no fear of being shamed by each other. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
That's
that
absolutely
gives
it.
And that gives us a certain privilege in being able to discover deeper meaning.
Yes.
So
that's exactly it.
It is safe conversation with ally who will, support each other in finding deeper meaning.
Exactly.
It's another kind of conversation.
Yes.
Right? It's another kind of heroic conversation.
Yes. And that's the community.
It's more than one.
Yeah. And when you think about when we sit in circle, it's not that we always agree. It's that it's exactly what you just said. It's that we are the community that has agreed to support each other. We've agreed to disagree, and we have agreed to have as truthful a conversation as we possibly can, and to hear and witness and be present for each other's truth. And
like you were saying about the light and the dark, to be able to say, I think you've got a blind spot here.
Right.
Like, I'm seeing it from this side and it looks a little differently. And to shed light on something that, just we miss. Yeah. We miss things all the time. Why? Because we're making up stories in our own head.
Right.
Right? We're storytellers.
Exactly.
We are always creating stories. Again, as human beings, we make up a story about, this plus this equals this.
Right.
It's that.
Right. Exactly. And then we go back and talk about, our story. This is my
Right,
version of the
right.
truth.
And
I'm
we
going to
look
tell
for
you
other
my
people
story.
who will support it with
Yeah.
evidence.
Can you believe she said that? Can you believe he said that? I mean,
Right.
there's that, and that is to me the really true danger, and I do think it's a danger of social media. Is the sound bite,
Mm,
is the tweet, there's no explanation. It's like one of the things my sister and I were talking about this today. I was so truly disappointed in the moderators of the second Democratic debate, right? Which
yes.
should be having some heroic conversations, and did, and touched on things, but
Mm-hmm.
just not a great format, too fast,
Mm-mm.
obviously. And then when they asked that question about, so who here thinks that we should give all illegal aliens free health care? And they all raised
Mm,
their hand. And I thought, well, geez, are you kidding? That is a huge conversation. And they
right.
all, I'm guessing that they all felt like they had to raise their hands. Then of course, and exactly, in a lot of times I have to admit I turn off the sound. I'm looking more at people. I've told you I do that all the
Mm.
time with.
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
don't listen that much. And actually, I didn't listen to that. Somebody told me what that was, and then I went back and listened to it, because I'll periodically look. That's why I like to read body language, because there's truth in that, and face language,
Mm,
as opposed to what's coming out of
mm,
somebody's mouth. Going back to the
mm.
Cornhusker story, unless the actions are and words align, I'm not really interested. So
Mm-hmm.
so but I really felt bad for them, because I said, what's going to happen? Somebody on the other side, some Republican, and it turned out to be the president, is going to tweet back something like, well, what are you more interested in people who are not citizens of this country, and than you are in American citizens? What about putting American citizens first? And
Right.
and that is precisely what happened. The second I heard what they had said, I knew that was going to happen. I think anybody with any intelligence knew that that was going to be the response, whether it came from the president or some other Republican. Because why? Two-party system, always at each other's throat. Hence, just let me throw in
Yeah.
my plug, forget a third party, some other
Right.
parties. But
Right. Mm,
but I
I
found
agree.
it, I really think that is the fault of the moderators. How can you ask that loaded a question that needs a much more deep answer? Explain to me why. And nobody said, I think that the American citizens should get nothing and illegal aliens should get everything. And, nobody said anything like that, because nobody said anything. It was just a hand raising question. That was
Yeah.
terrible. And that's like the Twitter thing, It's, you've got your followers following you on Twitter and not listening to anybody else and their opinions, and that is immaturity. So I think it was Joanne who
Mm-hmm.
posted something about maturity is being part of maturity. Joanne Angel, who does the show before mine, um, part of maturity is being able to have a conversation with people you disagree with, and not shoot each other, or not belittle each
Well,
other, or not demean each other.
well, and that, I think, speaks to another aspect of conversation, which is conversation happens in a context,
Right.
right?
Right.
So to take something that was said in conversation and not to describe the context
Right.
is, it's just not fair. It's not playing by the rules
No.
of a heroic conversation, of sacred conversation.
Right.
It is purely pulling out words to advance your position, to put somebody else down. So what we're looking at here is intention. And I think that Again, if we're clarifying what heroic conversation is, there is an intention at the start to find deeper meaning, to gain broader perspective, to come out slightly changed.
Yeah.
The intention is not to win, not to look good. The intention is not to, get the best points in. The intention is truly to create movement and space, and ultimately the ability to connect more
Right.
deeply to
Right.
self and other. So that kind of an alignment, there is no heroic conversation unless the parties align in that first. Now, with the original example you used, the man who went into the conversation with the Ku Klux Klan was aligned in, I want to be able to have more than one conversation here,
Right.
because I know it's going to take more than one. This isn't going to be a quick fix. I want to be invited back. That's a commitment for a longer process.
Yes.
That's a commitment to truly shift and be able to give room for both sides to be heard. So you talk about quick mind, good mind. Heroic conversations are not quick.
No, they're
not sound bites. They're
And-
just not. They're
No.
long and drawn out, and it takes a while. And then hopefully there's movement.
Right. And exactly. And I think your point about vulnerability is very, very important. You've got to have the courage to have the conversation. So
Right.
this tendency that some of our young representatives have to just say, no, 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 my way or the highway, to not want to compromise, to not recognize that somebody else's sacred point of view is equal to your sacred point of view and deserves being listened to, means you are never going to do the best for all the people. If you are saying it has to be my way, my voice, no compromise whatsoever, just my voice, you're a tyrant. That's it.
Well, though, it's also, look, it's really hard when you know you're right. Like, it's hard. Like, I know I'm right. How do I really move past this? Like, I'm coming from a good, sound place here. But
Right.
I guess everybody thinks they're right.
Yeah.
And so it is having to, like, actually step into that.
Right.
It's hard. I keep using that word because it is. Because we are biologically wired for survival to hold on to certain beliefs that keep us belonging to a certain group that is going to help us survive in life.
Right.
Right? So we're wired to create stories. We are wired for connection.
Right.
And we are wired for a sense of belonging based on belief. So, oh my God, if I'm going to let go of this belief, I am rattling my basic core of survival. It's going to be anxiety provoking.
Right.
And
that's
so it's monumental.
It is monumental. And that's where the three original...
But with that awareness, this is the thing that helps me. So I know this. I know the science. This is where science really helps me. I know how our neurobiology works.
Right.
So I get this. And when I feel myself getting anxious or feeling like I need to fight harder, I tell myself, I have the conversation with myself that says, it's okay. This is not life and death. This is about making space to hear, to listen, to understand. That's it. So I coach myself through that, and suddenly, there's more room. I'm still going to be free to hold on to the ideas I want to hold on to. No one will rob that from me.
Right.
And I can then engage and make more room for someone else. But that's the kind of inner conversation that it takes, inner guidance to get through these. Even difficult conversations, like for me, my heroic conversations are all around like conversations where I know I'm going to be disappointing someone. I
Mm.
have to say no about it, or I have to say I can't. Those kinds of conversations are radically uncomfortable for me. They go against core belief of kindness, of being able to give, of all that stuff. And a lot of times I've avoided those conversations and have just done things that I really shouldn't have, just for the sake of not hurting someone else's feelings.
Right.
And I've come to know the backlash from that. So now I know that's me. So I go in and I say to myself, this is one of your uncomfortable ones. Be brave, show up. It's okay. The pain, discomfort will last a few minutes. It'll pass. That kind of inner conversation. Just another way to think about it. Outer conversations, inner conversations, because we've got to start with ourselves in a way, making room
Absolutely.
and peace within ourselves.
Right. And that's where two things I find helping me through this as I listen to you too is the guidance of the great law of peace, the guidance
Yes,
of not just the three original instructions, but also the guidance of what kind of government do you have? You have a government where everyone's voice is heard, where all the laws are fair to everyone, and where men and women are equal. So those are the three requirements for a peaceful government, a government that will lead to peace, and the heroic conversations that need to be had when you are making laws that affect, in their case, thousands, and in our case, millions of people. So
yes,
you have to think that, and what that question that the peacemaker put to everybody: if you want peace, do you want to be right or do you want to be fair? And the
oh,
and and of course the answer to that is fair. So when we
yes,
look at the republic and a government of, by, and for the people, which is what a democratic republic is, we as its citizens have to get to that place that I always go back to this quote by John Kennedy because somehow it seems to be pertinent to so many things. This quote by John Kennedy, where he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do
mm,
for your country." And the first thing you can do for your country, especially if you're leading the country, is have that heroic conversation with yourself and ask yourself, is this my ego talking? Is this my, I
yes,
need to be perceived as this? Or
mm-hmm.
is it the skin that's 7 layers thick? You know, when they talk about the character quality of a leader, that Bob always talks about that on the show. Is a leader has to have a skin that's 7 layers thick because when he or she makes a decision based on what is right and best for everyone, there are going to be people that don't like it. They don't want to hear it.
Right,
They're going to get
yes,
upset about it. So you have been given the, if we were choosing leaders based on character and based on the teachings of the heroic conversation and or the warrior's journey, the hero's journey, then we would have better leaders. It is a time, to me, even as I look at myself, it is a time to really get into the roots of what it means to be of good character, to have integrity in everything you say. And part of that, I also read a great quote by Confucius that I didn't think I wrote down for today, but I read it very briefly. But it's a quote about how you can only be happy and content if you have that within yourself. and then you can go
Right.
out and be the virtuous person to other people. So you have to be virtuous within yourself and
Yes.
have what I love that you describe that as that inner heroic conversation. And once you've
Yes.
had that, but it's like you said earlier, I think that's a very important point. We have to slow down. You can't.
And look, it also brings to very much what I think is at the heart of your show. It's at the heart of your mission right now is radical democracy. So what is radical about this is, if we boil it down to what you're saying today, it is learning how to listen without preparing your perfect response back.
Right.
It is purely like, I am going to really make room and listen. And going back to, the peacemaker's journey, when you were talking about that, what I was thinking was, like, we all need our wisdom teachings, whatever resonates
Right.
with us, to lean back into, because when we are on a path to really answer our own personal call in life, it is very easy to get lost. Oh my God, there is so much out there, and there's so many things to read and so many different inputs. But for you to go back to three basic principles, listen to the people, fair, laws for all. And what was the third one, Maddi?
Men and women must be equal.
Men and women are equal. So wherever you are lost, if you lean back into that, because, again, as human beings, we are going to get lost because our feelings get hurt, our pride gets wounded, we create stories in our mind, we want so badly to belong.
Right.
All those things that make us human will also, get us to lose our way from time to time. But when you find your wisdom teaching, when you wise up, as you say, then there's a sense of, okay, am I staying close to these principles?
Right.
And if I'm not thinking about men and women as equal, if I am not, being fair in what I'm wanting, then no, I'm lost.
Right.
I have to pause. I've got to look again. Where did I go? And if any of us, I think it's the great, arrogance, think that we are not prone to that kind of getting lost. That's where, all those freaking spiritual gurus, leaders, capitalists who get lost to their ego.
Right.
And think they are somehow above humanness.
Right.
We're human.
Well,
we all get lost.
Yeah, we've talked about that with many people. You start out liking for one reason or another, following, and then they get a bad case of guru-itis. It's your
Right.
ego is very difficult to knock down and to set aside. And I was thinking about this yesterday when I was going back and forth about, should I take this post down? Should I not? Should I this? Should I that? And and part of the decision to do that is and it's age. Part of it is having lived longer and had many different experiences to draw from and many different conversations and sat in many different circles of people, is to go, well, here's where my ego is just, I'm partly I'm grieving, partly I'm feeling like I got to defend myself, partly some of this writing's pretty good, so I'm going to keep some of this and maybe do it in a blog sometime. The one thing about, and that I do love about, like, if I'll write something before we start the show, if I'll go through that writing process, because it clears my head and it slows me down. And then I go, well, let's look at that again. And that's why Daryl Davis is a hero to me. When I've read that piece probably 3 or 4 times, but just that summation he gives, you know, at the end when he says, first you're pointing out that he made this decision to go on this heroic journey, that to go back again and again and ultimately produce a book out of it. But that whole idea of his ego was out of it. He wasn't being the guru. I didn't convert anybody. They saw the
Yes,
light and converted themselves. I just sat
which
down and
is
had the
beautiful,
conversation.
right?
Yeah,
It's humble because it got to a very elevated point, which is
right.
the result of a hero's journey. But it began in the mundane. It began in a bar. It began with a simple statement, and there within that became the opportunity. In thinking about the show for today, yesterday I said to myself in the morning, because for me, most of my lessons come in the mundane. It's always been sacred in the mundane.
Yep.
So I said, I'm going to align myself with heroic conversations, because how many of our conversations are over Facebook, in online, on the phone? I said, today, whoever I encounter, I'm going to engage in conversation
Yeah.
and I'm going to listen. So going about my Saturday errands, I'm talking to the butcher. I'm talking to the kid who's checking me out at Target, but just in a sense of, I'm going to engage you. You are a human being. And it reminded me just of, oh my God, like we're all these human beings doing our jobs with such little chance for engagement. And then this little girl, I was getting my nails were drying. She comes up, she's sitting there next to me, and she looks at me and she says, "Are you a stranger?" I was like, I guess I would be. I am a stranger. She's like, "Oh, darn, then I can't talk to you." And I said to her, "Well, where's your mom?" And she said, "Oh, she's sitting over there." I said, "Can you see her?" And wave to her. She said, "Yeah, I can see her." I said, "So you're safe. Mom is here. She has her eye on you. I think it's safe for you to talk to me if you'd like." And then she started talking to me about her nails, her friends, graduating kindergarten. It was a lovely conversation. But in that moment, I thought, this little girl was scared to enter the conversation because of the way our world is,
Yeah.
right? And I resisted the impulse to say, "It's okay, I'm a good one," because that's what a kidnapper might say to
Right.
her. And I kind of thought, I have to give her a criteria of what will make it safe
Yes.
to talk to someone, to engage in a conversation or not. And so I close with that kind of thinking of, it's not always safe to jump into the heroic conversation. You got to
Exactly.
make sure there are people who can support you, that you can lean back into if it gets dangerous, because it can.
Exactly.
And
It can.
that's what I learned from that cutie pie with the pink nails.
Oh, well, that's a great lesson, especially as we talk about this truth telling in the age of groupthink. And I think what you brought up earlier is extremely important. People want to belong, and especially young
Yeah.
people, and especially today.
Mhm.
They face a lot more than we even know about. And that's what makes the
Yeah.
heroic conversation so important. So, Marianne, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh,
Bobby,
Maddie, as
Sarah,
always, it's a journey with
I
you.
know, my favorite producer of all time. Thank you, everybody here at Strong Island Radio, Strong Island TV. Check it out. There's lots of cool stuff going on. Thank you all for listening. Peace, love, rock and roll. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.